Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Another one of our Safer at Home series talks. Hope you're all staying cool, comfortable, collected in what I hope are air-conditioned digs. In a moment of true confession, Vice Admiral Stosz and I were talking, and I did say that when we agreed to do this, we we're going to do it virtually. I didn't realize that mask mandates would be lifted as quickly as they were, that people would get as vaccinated as they were. But I also didn't realize it was going to be 95 and really humid. So I'm not sure if you were going to come out anyway, or if you're just going to join the AC. So I'm glad you're home. Hopefully you're nice and cool, and let's settle back and relax. Before we get started tonight, a couple things. As you know, all our talks are brought to us by Cape Cod 5, First Citizens Federal Credit Union, and Martha's Vineyard Savings. We also have a special grant from Mass Humanities that allows us to do some of these talks for free. All the books on our list are available at Eight Cousins Bookseller in Falmouth. We hope that you participate in the local economy and go there and buy a book. Our guest tonight is probably known to many of you, but I'm going to do something I don't normally do, because her introduction on the back of her book is better than anything I could come up with. Admiral Sandy Stosz started out in the U.S. Coast Guard as an ensign serving on polar icebreakers, conducting national security missions from the Arctic to the Antarctic. She was the first woman to command an icebreaker on the Great Lakes and to lead a U.S. Armed Forces Service Academy. After serving for 12 years at sea, commanding 2 ships and leading 2 large Coast Guard organizations during times of crisis and complexity, she finished her career as the first woman assigned as Deputy Commandant for mission support, directing one of the Coast Guard's largest enterprises. She has lectured widely on leadership, has been featured on C-SPAN and other media outlets. In 2012, the Daily Beast named Sandy to their list of 150 women who shake the world. Would you welcome our guest tonight, Vice Admiral Sandra Stosz, and Falmouth resident.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and good evening, everyone. Thank you to all those who registered and zoomed in to listen to this, my very first book talk since launching Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Uncharted Waters on June 1st. And actually, since that's my first book, it's my first book talk ever. So I'm a little nervous. So you guys will have to smile and wave at me a little bit here and there. So I'm truly honored by your presence. I know everyone's busy with a host of summertime activities. Now that we're moving past the COVID shutdowns, it's really humbling to be here. I looked at the books that were being put up by Mark as we waited, and there's some great authors up there, good company. And your support means so much to me as a new author. Take it from me as someone who spent 12 years at sea in the Coast Guard, navigating down a narrow channel or into the teeth of a storm on a ship. That's nothing compared to navigating the uncharted waters of the book writing and publishing process. But I'm pleased to report that the book achieved #1 new release status on Amazon, and it's doing well. You can get your copy from our friendly neighborhood bookstore, as Mark said, Eight Cousins. And please note that all the proceeds from the sale of the book will be donated to the Coast Guard Academy James Loy Institute for Leadership that will help develop the next generation of Coast Guard leaders of character. So we blocked an hour for this session, and I'm going to take the first 40 or so minutes. I'm not sure exactly how long it'll take me. You know how it goes with stories. I'm going to thank my supporters, talk about why I wrote the book, tell you a little bit about the book, read a chapter from the book, and tell a little bit about my story. Then I'll turn it over to Mark for Q&A. And there's no way I can cover 40 years of experience in one measly hour, or actually less. So please be thinking about questions and put them into the chat. I think interactive questions are much better than me sitting here telling you stories. So let's launch this talk. So I've learned during my 40-year Coast Guard career and in my subsequent journey as an author that no one succeeds alone. I've depended upon others to help bring Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass to you, and I owe so much to this incredibly supportive Falmouth community. And now it gives me great pleasure to take a moment to publicly thank those local people and organizations who helped me achieve my goals. And I think thanking people is so important, at least to me, it matters. First and foremost, thanks to Mark Schmidt and Museums on the Green for giving me this opportunity to share with you this evening about the Coast Guard in my book. And Mark is a powerhouse of energy and enthusiasm, and our community is fortunate to have him showcasing our rich history here in Falmouth. I'm excited to note that Museums on the Green is going to be resuming some in-person events in early July. So I hope everyone comes out to support this venerable historical society. I know I need to do that because I haven't done one of the walks yet. And Eight Cousins Bookshop, that they work hand in hand with Museums on the Green to bring you these book talks. And the owners, I know all of them, Eileen Miskell, Janet Totten, and Sarah Hines, they've mentored and supported me as a new author, and I sincerely thank them. It means so much. So please pay them a visit and check out their wide selection of books. And my book would remain unknown and my leadership lessons lost to history without media to amplify my voice. So I want to thank the Falmouth Enterprise for featuring my book in the Friday, June 25th edition with a really well-crafted, insightful piece by Joanne Brianna Gartner. She's just a great writer. And thank you to Kathy Scrizzy Driscoll at the Cape Cod Times. She featured my book in the summer reading section. I was honored to have that book appear. And thank you to Mindy Todd and Amy Vince at NPR's WCAI for inviting me to share about my book and leadership journey on The Point. The episode aired on June 17th. And I also want to thank those organizations that saw promise and asked me to present my book. I thank Jane Pariala for inviting me to showcase my book at the Falmouth Art Market book booth, and just hope it doesn't thunder and rain on Thursday. I'll be the first author of the season and would love to have you stop by between noon and 2 p.m. this Thursday, July 1st, rain or shine. It's just water. And thank you to Jessica O'Connor at the Falmouth Library for inviting me to participate in an upcoming author talk panel to be held via Zoom. So you're not the only one, Mark. That's going to be via Zoom at 4 p.m. on July 12th. And a special thanks to my friends, Karen Ronaldo and Kevin Doyle, for serving as role models to inspire me. And we all need inspiration to keep going through hard times. So why did I write this book? I wrote Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass to give back leadership lessons learned during my 40-year journey with the Coast Guard, from cadet or student at the Coast Guard Academy to the executive level or admiral. And I gotta say, I gotta put a plug in for the Coast Guard. I think I can do that. And the Coast Guard is an amazing organization, and I'm so proud to have served our nation executing Coast Guard missions. They've got a strong presence here in Falmouth with a base in Woods Hole. They have patrol boats and response boats that perform search and rescue, law enforcement, waterway safety, homeland security, and much more. And then Joint Base Cape Cod. They've got helicopters and airplanes that perform Coast Guard missions from the air when they can't be reached by boat. But the Coast Guard is not just local. So here in Falmouth, we think about Woods Hole and Joint Base Cape Cod if we're thinking about the Coast Guard. But we're also international. So we have great big ships. We have 418-foot brand new national security cutters that are patrolling in the South China Sea to maintain a United States presence over in that volatile area. We also have fast response cutter patrol boats in the Persian Gulf, serving over there to protect the Navy, believe it or not, gray hull assets from danger in that waterway. And we have polar icebreakers in the Arctic and the Antarctic, just to name a few. Just wanted to briefly go over, because I think a lot of people, when they think of the Coast Guard, they do think right here, the small boats that keep us safe and secure in the shores off Cape Cod. But serving in the Coast Guard was hard. Those are great missions, great people. But there were times when I was cold, wet, hungry, tired, and scared, and sometimes all at once. But that made me a shy and confident young woman, a leader, by pushing me to what I thought were my limits and then beyond. And I never would have done that on my own. So I owe a great debt to the Coast Guard for pushing me beyond my limits. And as with mentoring, I feel like I got more from the Coast Guard over those 40 years than what I gave. And I gave a lot, but the Coast Guard gave me something I couldn't have given myself with pushing me to achieve my full potential. And through the leadership lessons in this book, I want to help others succeed in achieving their full potential. And the backstory behind the book is that I was a lieutenant in the Coast Guard at about 28 years old. I've been 6 years at sea, and I got orders to come ashore and be the aide to the Coast Guard Service Secretary. And at the time, we were in the Department of Transportation. This was 1990, way back, and 1989. And we're now in the Department of Homeland Security after 9/11, but working for the secretary, and had a chance to look down on the whole government to find out where the Coast Guard fit, to see how all the pieces moved, to see how government worked. And it was confusing then, it's still confusing now. But I was telling one of my friends and colleagues on the secretary's staff, I said to her one day, Shane, I've got to write a book about this someday. We're being given such a great opportunity to see how government works and to see how Mr. Skinner, the Secretary of Transportation, leads with all these challenges and all these crises, like the Exxon Valdez oil disaster, Hurricane Hugo, the San Francisco earthquake. That all happened within a year in like 1989. And Shane had known that I had been on icebreakers, and I'd been one of the first women to do this or that in the Coast Guard. So she looked at me and said, Sandy, you've got to call that book Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass. And here we are 30 years later, and Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass is published. So I'm very excited about the story behind the book, because it actually came to fruition, which I was committed to making that happen. And what's the book about? Well, the title says a lot. Breaking Ice and Breaking Glass, Leading in Uncharted Waters. It's the story of my journey from entering service at the Coast Guard Academy in one of the first classes to include women. And I'll talk about that story a little bit later. Upon graduating and commissioning as an ensign in the Coast Guard, I served 3 years aboard polar icebreakers sailing from the Arctic to the Antarctic. And I found myself breaking ice and breaking glass all 40 years following that first assignment. In the military, officers promote together with their peer group based on time in service. So I couldn't outrun being the first, even though I tried. I didn't want to be the first. I just wanted to be another Coast Guard person doing their job. And when I wasn't literally breaking the ice, though, which I was stuck doing, couldn't outrun it, I was figuratively breaking the ice as the first to only woman at many of my units, including 6 of the ships. So one way or the other, breaking ice and breaking glass. And through the personal stories derived from my unique experiences that I'm privileged to have had, I hope the book will teach leaders, aspiring leaders, experienced leaders, how to find and then become an inspiring mentor, implement effective diversity, inclusion, and equity programs, successfully lead in an ever-changing environment, and much more. And I come to a point now where I want to do a book reading, and I thought about what to do with this talk, my first author talk, and I'm like, okay, it's my first talk. Get away with anything I want to get away with, right? So I want to give you a feel for the book, and what better way than a traditional book reading to kick off my talk. And I hadn't thought of doing a book reading, but then I'm like, wait a minute, I think it would be good to give a little reading on what the book is like in case people want to go out and buy it. So I'll start with a sea story. Here goes. It was a dark and stormy night. Is anybody buying that? I hate not having an audience. It's crazy doing this from Zoom. But anyway, I'm just kidding. All sea stories seem to start with it was a dark and stormy night. I'm not going to start that way, but I'm going to tell a sea story. So rest at ease. It's not going to be one of those dark and stormy night ones. So Chapter 1, Getting Underway in Uncharted Waters. Quote, a Pathfinder's North Star is character. That's by Jonathan Treacy, Major General, U.S. Air National Guard, retired. The wind-driven sleet stung my face and hurt my eyes. I closed them tightly, wiped, then opened them again to scour the tumultuous seas for icebergs and other hazards to navigation. Drawing a deep breath of frigid, sea-sprayed air, I savored the taste of the stinging saltiness on my lips. I was a new ensign standing watch on board the Coast Guard icebreaker Glacier, sailing to Antarctica. As a break-in underway officer of the deck, I was learning under the tutelage of a qualified watchstander and was responsible to the commanding officer for directing the movements of the ship. Never had I experienced such responsibility or such excitement. I was living my dream. Antarctica is my favorite place in the entire world. It is the most amazing, remarkable, and ruggedly beautiful place on Earth. The fifth largest of the 7 continents, it hosts the world's southernmost active volcano, the 12,500-foot Mount Erebus. Despite being covered with ice up to 4 miles thick, Antarctica boasts one of the world's largest mountain ranges, and its renowned dry valleys are the driest place on Earth. It's no great surprise, it also ranks as the windiest and coldest place on Earth. And regardless of these seemingly inhospitable conditions, marine life abounds. Numerous species of seals, penguins, whales, birds, fish, and colorful invertebrates inhabit the Antarctic Ocean and surrounding ice. The Adelie penguins are my favorite, incredibly cute and very curious. They would waddle right up to the ship to get a closer look at us. On the voyage from Glacier's home port in Long Beach, California, down to Antarctica, we crossed the equator with its oppressive heat and doldrums. The ship wasn't air conditioned and the temperature rose to well over 100 degrees in some of the berthing areas. The heat forced people topside to sleep. At night, crew members of all ranks and rates covered the decks, wrapped in their bedding to escape the suffocation of the berthing areas. Looking down from my watch station high up on the bridge or pilot house of the ship, the starlight played upon the motionless mounded bodies. It looked for all the world like the deck of a ghost ship coasting silently through the darkness. Our track line continued down through the South Pacific to the roaring 40s, furious 50s, and screaming 60s as we entered the southern latitudes. There, the weather could become notoriously rough and deadly. Even though our ship was 310 feet long, the incredibly strong winds and huge seas battered us mercilessly as we crossed those harsh latitudes. The ship, which had a rounded hull designed for breaking the ice, rolled wildly in the open sea. Sure enough, our first casualty came when a huge wave hit the ship and threw the helmsman off the wheel. The helmsman suffered severe injuries from crashing into the leeward side of the 75-foot wide bridge. Blood mixed with spilled coffee and seawater to create a treacherous surface on the dielectric deck covering. We medically evacuated the injured crew member by helicopter the next day when the seas subsided. I came away from that experience with a much deeper respect for Mother Nature. The first iceberg we encountered was small, but made for much conversation. For many of us in the crew, it was our first ice. The novelty wore off as we very quickly found ourselves navigating an entire sea of small icebergs or bergy bits, like a minefield. They popped up, seemingly out of nowhere, through dense fog formed by the cold Antarctic current meeting the warmer surface air. We were engaged in a dangerous and scary exercise. Although the bergy bits looked small, much of their mass lay below the waterline, and striking one could significantly damage the ship, big and heavy as it was at 310 feet and over 8,000 tons. I quickly came to understand and deeply appreciate the breadth of responsibility that would be entrusted to me once I earned my qualification as an officer of the deck. I resolved to be worthy of that trust and to earn my qualification as soon as possible. Within a few days, the fog gave way to sparkling blue skies and scintillating icebergs, many of them emanating an ethereal, deep cobalt hue, denoting their ancient origins. Not long after, we all heard the shout, "Land ho!" and our gazes met the mountains of Antarctica on the horizon. To my astonishment, the mountains were still 150 miles away. The clean, clear polar atmosphere deceived us into believing they were much closer. The sea and sky teemed with the marvels of Antarctic ocean marine life. The omnipresent minke whales lolled past, feeding idly on plentiful krill. Looking skyward, I gazed with wonder as wandering albatross, the largest seabird in the world with a wingspan of up to 10 feet, curiously circled to check out the ship. Finally, after weeks of transit, we arrived at our destination, the ice edge. The channel leading to the pier at the U.S. Naval Station in McMurdo, Antarctica, was covered in sea ice for 20 to 30 miles. Glacier's role was to break a path through the ice, open the channel, and escort the merchant ships that supplied the station and its residents. I loved my job and could hardly believe I was getting paid to participate in a once-in-a-lifetime adventure that few other people would ever realize. Who else would have the opportunity to break open the shipping channel in the shadow of Mount Erebus? An active volcano, it simmered mysteriously, releasing gas into the atmosphere as if it were a living, breathing entity. My euphoria was dampened daily. Despite standing 2 4-hour watches per day under instruction, I had not yet received my coveted deck watch officer qualification. Once qualified, I would be authorized to stand my own independent watch without another officer supervising me. My eagerness to earn that qualification surpassed all else. Unfortunately, no matter how hard I worked and how well I progressed, my supervisor didn't see what he wanted. Earning my qualification was proving to be harder than navigating through the seas of icebergs I encountered on watch. My frustration mounted when my supervisor admitted I demonstrated the technical proficiency and judgment to stand the watch. In his mind, I lacked something in my command presence, but he couldn't articulate the details to help me advance. One of my shipmates, Ray, was an old salt and a qualified watchstander who was helping me break in. He had served in the Coast Guard for over 20 years, and he became my first mentor. Ray encouraged me, telling me I was doing a good job, to trust my instincts and be patient. His support kept me focused and motivated when I became discouraged. One day after watch, my boss called me in and told me he had figured it out. I was too quiet. He wouldn't qualify me until I stood at my post on the bridge of the ship, barking orders like John Wayne with a 6-gun in each hand. John Wayne was a macho movie star and the consummate male role model for my generation. Perhaps it was only natural for my boss to think a leader had to establish a demanding and bold command presence to earn respect. My personality is different. I'd always struggled as a shy introvert in an extrovert's world. I wasn't loud and outspoken. I was quietly competent. No one would ever mistake me for John Wayne. Standing watch, I spoke in a voice loud enough to be heard and to deliver the necessary commands, but did not shout unless I needed to. I enjoyed getting to know my fellow watchstanders and build professional relationships with them. I usually didn't need to raise my voice to compel compliance. The crew members knew their jobs and wanted to perform well. In my view, the officer of the deck's duty required leading the team and coordinating the efforts while trusting the competent watchstanders to perform their duties. It worked for me to lead by building trust and earning respect, not by demonstrating my authority as the one in charge. When my boss told me, "You've got to change your leadership style to get qualified," I felt distressed and confused. After giving it much thought and listening to my mentor, Ray, I realized succeeding meant accepting myself for who I was. I had to be true to myself and stop trying to be someone else. I let go of the image of John Wayne and immediately felt as free as one of the albatross soaring high above our ship. With that newfound courage came confidence. My boss noticed. I think he came to realize and accept that my style of leadership got the job done, even if it differed from his. I learned it wasn't my leadership style or personality that held me back. It was my lack of self-confidence. Other people wouldn't have confidence in me until I demonstrated confidence in myself. Finally, my boss recommended me to the commanding officer, who gave me my deck watch officer qualification. At last, I was fully qualified. The excitement and enthusiasm elevated my spirits as high as Mount Erebus. On my first solo watch, I climbed a long ladder inside the ship's hollow mast, high above the deck, to the control station known as Aloft Con. To cut the channel, I needed a good view to see where the ice cracked so I could find a path. I followed the cracks or leads to ease our progress through the thick ice. The bridge is normally where the watchstanders control the ship, but for ice breaking, it's too low. Aloft Con provides a better line of sight and includes a full control station for engines and steering. Operating the ship in Aloft Con, far above the decks and removed from the rest of the ship and crew, was an otherworldly experience. I stood many watches alone up there, feeling like an eagle on its eyrie, keenly searching for the leads to follow as I broke a path down the channel. I was astounded at the diversity of wildlife that appeared to be enjoying the endless Antarctic summer days as much as I was. As the ship surged forward through the ice, I blew the whistle to urge lounging seals or penguins to hasten out of the track. They waddled or wriggled away at their best speed, looking so ridiculously funny I would laugh. As we opened a pathway behind us, whales followed to take advantage of new waters and food sources. During the Antarctic summer, the sun never sets, creating a sensation of timeless energy. Mount Erebus, rising high above the rugged landscape, watched over me whenever I stood watch, never failing to elicit within me awe at the grandeur of what is truly the world's last frontier. Standing aloft on the bridge of the mighty glacier, gazing forward upon the vast expanse of the Antarctic, I felt confident and excited about the future, despite the icebergs I could foresee in my path. Reflecting on my humble start in life, I realized every barrier I'd faced and overcome had shaped my character, my North Star that had guided me to where I stood on the bridge of Glacier the day I earned my coveted watchstander qualification. I knew then I was ready to lead in uncharted waters. That's the end of my chapter reading. And from there, I will go back and talk about my story that started long before I confidently stood on the bridge of the glacier. It took hard work and perseverance to get to that place. My childhood, I was a very shy and not so confident child, but my childhood was filled with opportunities to internalize core values and develop my character. I was raised the eldest of 4 children with 3 brothers, 3 younger brothers. I think that made it easier for me to succeed as the first or only woman leading mostly male teams during my time in the Coast Guard. My parents treated us kids all the same. I was a tomboy, of course. How could I not be? We participated in sports together, we hiked as a family, and we all had jobs as teenagers. In the summer, starting at age 13, I stayed with my grandparents in Amherst, Massachusetts, and did farm work, picking cucumbers and sowing tobacco in the Connecticut River Valley. It was hot, sweaty, grimy work. You had to make a quota every day or you'd be fired. As a reward for that hard work, I spent a couple of weeks with my other set of grandparents who owned a home on the water right here in Falmouth. Grandma and Grandpa lived on Great Bay off Mary Vista Avenue. My grandpa took us kids fishing and showed us how to dig for clams, or rake for quahogs, and net for crabs. And Grandpa would take me out in an old rowboat. And even in that humble craft, I learned to love being on the water. And it's right here in Falmouth where I developed my liking for the sea and its lore, because I had no other experience with the water. And you never know how those experiences are going to lead you to a path and an outcome, as it did with me, leading me to the Coast Guard Academy. So during childhood, I learned those core values that I talked about earlier: hard work, perseverance, honesty, and humility. And later in the Coast Guard, I internalized the service's core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty. And I didn't appreciate it at the time. It was only in writing this book and looking back over my career to some extent that I learned the real value of core values and character. And of all the leadership lessons I learned over the course of my 40-year career, perhaps the most significant is the importance of those core values and the character they build. And I see it when I look around today. There's a tendency to define each other by external factors such as skin color or gender, and that we never did in the Coast Guard. Those factors are what you look like. You have no control over those. The character, though, is who you are, and you can control how you act. You can control how hard you work, how you behave. The Coast Guard taught me we should all strive to be defined by our character, who we are and how we act, not by our appearance. I think that is one reason why we're successful in the Coast Guard, because we look beyond the outward appearance to focus on being part of something bigger than any one of us, with Coast Guard missions and hard work, selfless service, sacrificing to serve America. And you look beyond skin deep factors when those higher goals are what your eyes are set on. So a common question I always get when I'm talking with people or meeting someone new is, why did you join the Coast Guard? And it's a good question. And I love answering this question because it gives me a chance to talk about another thing I didn't appreciate when I was younger. So for context, I was born in 1960, and I'm going to talk about legislation that and policy that provided access for a girl my age to participate in activities that helped me to get into the Coast Guard Academy. So in 1974, when I entered high school, Title IX was 2 years old. That's the title that provided equal opportunity for education, equal opportunity for women in education. And the next year, the Equal Rights Amendment was passed. And then, excuse me, and then in 1975, the National Defense Authorization Act mandated that all the service academies, not just the Coast Guard Academy, all of them, Annapolis, where the Navy is, West Point, where the Army is, Colorado Springs, where the Air Force is, Merchant Marine, and the Coast Guard Academy in London, all opened their door to women. And it's amazing thinking about it now that as early as 1976, women weren't allowed at the service academies. But when I came into high school, I could play sports, and there was a coach assigned. It wasn't just a club sport. I could develop my confidence as a young athlete, and I needed that to be able to have the confidence to apply to an academy. So doing sports, having the benefits that my mother hadn't had, and women just a few years older than me hadn't had, I really appreciate that. And I think it is so important to remember that in a day and age where people complain about a lot, but there's been so much progress. And things are so much better now than when I entered the Coast Guard over 40 years ago. I did enter the academy as a cadet in 1978 in the third class of women. There were only 5% women. I applied to the academy because my neighbor brought over, I was living in Ellicott City, Maryland. My neighbor brought over a copy of the Baltimore Sun and said, Sandy, I know you're a tomboy. You might be interested in this. And it was featuring the Naval Academy, but my guidance counselor said, hey, Sandy, there's also a Coast Guard Academy, because I was keen on taking advantage of this new opportunity that was freshly available. It just sounded like, why not? I kind of always liked, even though I was quiet and shy, I didn't want to be told no or that I couldn't do something. So the fact that something that had been closed off to women, girls, women, and was now open, I was excited about breaking, I was going to say breaking ice. I didn't even plan to say that, but breaking into something new that hadn't been available. So my guidance counselor helped me with expanding my search from the Naval Academy to the Coast Guard Academy. And I ended up going to the Coast Guard Academy. To make a long story short, 5% women was all it was, and the whole 1,000 cadet corps. So there weren't many of us. And it was hard. I won't go into that. You'll have to read the book because I can't tell all these stories in 45 minutes. But I was thrilled to return over 30 years later, having gone in as a cadet in 78. In 2011, I came back amazingly as the first woman to lead a U.S. Armed Forces Service Academy when I came back as superintendent. And at that time, during the 4 years I was superintendent, we increased the percent of women to 36%. So started out 5% when I entered, and 30 some odd years later, 36% women, which I would argue is pretty close to a critical mass. So a critical mass is something that's hard to define, but over the years, I've come to define critical mass as you know it when you feel it. And so you had equal numbers of athletic varsity sports for women at the Coast Guard Academy when you had 36%, because you had enough women to field all those teams and to be present in all the different clubs and activities in a number more than just one, like I was. So much has changed over the 40 years, and all for the better, huge amounts of progress. But there were certainly hard times to endure along the way. And I'll go over just a couple of those stories because I know people can learn better from the stories. And one of the hard times I went through along the way, because I look back and I see nothing but the positive, but if I think about it, yeah, there was tough times. So after that job, when I was the military aide of the Secretary of Transportation, when I was just a junior officer, leaving his job, I went off to command a ship called the Katmai Bay. It was an icebreaker. It is an icebreaker up in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan on Lake Superior. And I had been 6 years at sea, but it was my first command. I was the first woman to ever command any kind of ship on the Great Lakes, including merchant marine. So it was a newsmaker again. I couldn't outrun being the first, no matter how hard I tried. But the secretary, the service secretary, Mr. Sam Skinner, came to my change of command up there in the Sault Ste. Marie. And I didn't think anything of it, but service secretaries don't even come to senior people's changes of command or new job assumptions. And so it was very highly unheard of for him to fly all the way to Sault Ste. Marie to attend and preside at my change of command. So my boss, this is back in 1990 for context, because things have changed, but I had to go through that 40 years and it was harder in the beginning. And when it was all over, my boss, who was really a senior officer, he was a captain, 06, he was in his, he was in his 50s. And he looked at me and said, "You're just the secretary's fair-haired golden girl. We'll see how long you last." And proceeded to make it hard on me. And I had, meanwhile, was captain of this ship with 17 men and trying to do a demanding mission. And finally, one day, unbeknownst to me, one of my crew became an ally of mine. And it was a guy about my age, an enlisted man who was in charge of deck force. He was a chief petty officer. And he went up to the captain and closed the door and said, "Captain, you need to back off our skipper." It's a slang for commanding officer. "She's doing a good job, and it's just you're messing things up because the crew never gets any praise because you're always picking on our skipper. So you need to back off." And he did. And I never knew that for a long time, like for years, I didn't know this chief petty officer had stood up for me as an ally in front of the commanding officer who could have messed up his career. And I tell you, it was a lesson for me because I realized those hard times that almost brought me down. I had my resignation letter written, and I realized to get through hard times, you've got to look at the bigger picture, take your head up and get it out of the tunnel vision. You got to focus on one day at a time. You can't look at, I've got 2 more years of this misery to endure, one day at a time. And you've got to start feeling grateful, start a gratitude journal. And I do that to this day. I write down 3 things every night before I go to bed that I'm grateful for. And it really makes a difference and helps you get through hard times. And another thing that I feel was a part of my story of getting up from the bottom to the top of the organization was recognizing and embracing inflection points along the way of my career. So, I mean, I didn't just come into the Coast Guard Academy, graduate as an ensign, go down to Antarctica and just stay on ships the whole time and just no big decisions on my career. And all of us listening in tonight have probably had inflection points in their lives or their careers. And you got to be open to recognizing them and taking the opportunities, not shrinking back because you're afraid of the risk or afraid of failure. So there came a time when I was a more senior officer, and I'd been 12 years at sea. I commanded a couple of ships. There was one more size ship that was the expectation was that I go as a seagoing officer, that I would go command that next bigger ship. But I'm like, something inside me said, maybe it's time for a change in my career. What is it that I really love about being at sea? I thought maybe it's all those things you just heard me talk about when I was talking about going to Antarctica, the beauty, the splendor, the wonder of it. And I thought, it's not. It's looking down from that position up on the bridge or the pilot house at young people who just reported aboard from boot camp on the enlisted side or the Coast Guard Academy on the officer side. And they reported aboard kind of unconfident like I was when I first reported aboard. But within a few weeks, they're pulling on lines and they're shouting out, commands, and they're developing into those young leaders. And I thought, that's what I want to do, is develop the next generation of leaders. And I asked to go and be assigned as the commanding officer of our boot camp, the training center at Cape May, New Jersey. And I was privileged to get those orders. And from there, I eventually went on to command the Coast Guard Academy. And oh my goodness, am I glad I turned around and embrace the opportunity to leave what would have been another 2 years at sea to a great big opportunity to make a real impact and to pursue my passion that had matured over time. So we all change as we go through and need to recognize those changes and be ready to respond to them and not be afraid of the failure. And I got all kinds of hours and hours worth of talks on failing and reaching for opportunity, but we don't have time for that. And I know it's 7:46. I got one more story here that I'm going to skip because there's a lot of stories to be able to tell, but it does deal with overcoming exhaustion and maintaining wellness. And I've gotten some good feedback on that section from people who've read the book because we don't talk about it enough. How do you keep going for 40 years? How do you go through not just get through one hard time, but how do you balance and how do you manage your exhaustion and maintain your wellness? So there's a whole section of that in my book that I won't go through. But to wrap up and move into Q&As, which will probably be more stimulating, I think I succeeded in my career in part because there's a lot of factors, but I'll give 3 things that just come to mind as I was preparing notes for this talk tonight. Because I lived my core values and tried to always lead with character, I tried to always show the courage to do the right thing, even if it was hard and there was an easier, not so right that I could do. And 2, because I worked hard and persevered through the hard times. And 3, because I learned how to find that balance and to manage the exhaustion and maintain my wellness. Not just, for 6-week patrols at sea, post 9/11 when you're patrolling off New York and tired and hungry and cold and all that, but also in the longer term, how do you look at an entire career and keep your wellness through that so that you are there for your family, you have activities and hobbies, that you're a balanced person at the end, and you're not like a sponge all wrung out when you come time to retire and move into your next phase of your life. So lots of information there. I think in conclusion, everyone's going to face uncharted waters throughout their life. And I hope the leadership lessons in this book help people achieve their full potential in their careers and their personal lives. I think the book will resonate with young people starting their career, mid-level people who have still got runway to move up to the executive level if they so desire. My third part of the book, and it's in 3 parts, is focused a little bit more on executives. And I hope they can learn how to give back and to inspire young people to come up and relieve them, in addition to being better leaders who motivate their people as opposed to just leading by power. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Mark to go for questions. And hopefully you've been making notes and putting some questions in chat. And if not, please do so now. Mark?
Oh, thank you, Admiral. Great job. You can relax now. You got the first one under your belt. You're good.
Yay!
You mentioned about, that somebody was trying to make into John Wayne, and you obviously said not so fast to that. But as you look back on it, and you had to, I don't know, bumper sticker it, what would you say your leadership style is?
Oh, engaged leadership. I've already got a whole section of the book on that. And I actually had to think about that. So at the Coast Guard Academy, we start cadets out, young people, college students, on developing a leadership philosophy so they can get used to that idea. And as they grow and mature as leaders, they can keep refining that leadership philosophy. And so for me, I didn't really feel like I was fully present to write a leadership philosophy till I was maybe 20 some odd years into my career, and it had all that experience to build on. And I decided that my style is engaged leadership. And it goes to that same ethos of when I was an ensign on the glacier, and I would rather engage with the crew than stand aloof and bark orders at them. I'd rather get to know them, find out what makes them tick, find out how to bring out their best potential, and engage with them at the deck plate level, as we would say on a ship. So I went back to my basic me, my identity, and they call that authentic leadership nowadays. I don't really care for that term because it is fraught with peril, if you ask me. You don't want to see me as an authentic person if I hadn't had my coffee coming into the office. You really want to see probably an engaged leader who's genuine, genuinely concerned about their people. So yeah, engaged leadership. And I've got a leadership philosophy that I won't take the time to go into here tonight, but it has 3 principles. Build trust and earn respect, believe in yourself and others, and demonstrate moral courage. And there's a whole talk on each one of those.
As she said, if you got a question, use the chat feature. Somebody mentioned that there's a Coast Guard museum in Barnstable Village, to make sure you check that out, and your book is in there for the, make sure your book's in there for the gift shop.
It is.
Okay. How did the Admiral manage to succeed in situations where she was the only woman in the unit?
Yes, and that happened all the time. And once again, I got to say, it goes back to this engaged leadership, which of course is why over time, when I reflected back to try to come up with a leadership philosophy so I could do my duty as a senior officer and give people an understanding of who I am and what kind of a leader I am. So they're not sitting there wondering, what's the new boss like? What makes her tick? You know, I wanted to tell them, here's what I believe about leadership. So that question goes back to how I acted naturally when I first was younger and was the first woman, only woman on a few of my ships. And I found that there's a little formula that has been my key to success my whole career. And it's called the 3 P's of power. And one of my bosses told me this when I was an ensign. And he said, Sandy, I came to him one day with a problem. I couldn't get a crew member to do the job that he was supposed to do. It was somebody who was on punishment detail, so he was already not happy. And I came to my boss for advice. How do I get this young man, because it was all men, to do his job? And my boss looked at me and said, Sandy, there's 3 kinds of power. There's personal power, professional power, and position power. And those who succeed will be the ones who lean on the first 2 and use the last only as a last resort. And that would be your position power. So I learned early on to use my personal power and my professional power to break the ice as the only woman. So I wouldn't sit back and say, oh, all these men should know exactly what I want, what I need, and they should make my life comfortable and welcome me into this workplace. That wasn't going to happen. I'd be sitting there forever, miserable and not succeeding. So I used my personality and I tried to find humor and joke about things. And there was one little incident where I was the only woman on the ship with 50 men, and we were underway. I was senior. I was the operations officer, so the 3rd in command. So it helped. If you're a junior woman, I do not deny life would have been harder. But I was on watch with one of my enlisted men on the midnight watch. It's dark and boring. He says to me, ma'am, he says, we love having you on board because we don't like it when the guys are crude on the mess deck where you eat. And we can just use you as an excuse now. Miss Stosz is on board. You can't say that or do that. And so I laughed. And so the next time I walked down the hallway, passageway, we call it, to the mess deck, and I heard one of the guys cussing or making a swear word, I said, hey, you can't say that. I'm on board. And would you say that to your mom or your sister? And they said, oh, no, ma'am. And so I used my difference as a superpower because I found out that I could, right? And you find out what you need to do to de-escalate the situation, to use some humor. You're professional. So that's your personal side. You're professional. You do your job. You do it well. You work hard. You're there when you're supposed to be. You dress appropriately. All these things that give you professional power. And you ask questions. So you empower other people and make them feel like, hey, I can teach the new ops boss, operations officer something. And you find out what your people need and you deliver quick wins. So you get on board, you look around, you see, what can I do to help make my part of the ship better? And you deliver for them. So it goes back to those 3 Ps, personal power, professional power, and then that position power, you leave it alone, let it on the sideline unless you really need it. And a lot of people go on and they want to come right in. And they think, well, I better show how tough I am. I'm in charge. I'm an only woman, so I better show they can't mess with me. And they come in with a hammer, the position power. You fail. And then they wonder, why did I fail? So that's my recipe.
You obviously had to deal with young people throughout your career. As you look back, have things changed? How do you deal with an 18-year-old, a 20-year-old today versus 20 years ago versus 40 years ago? Have they changed, or have we just changed and gotten older?
I get asked this question a lot too. And having commanded Cape May and the Coast Guard Academy, young people, this is my view, and it's you asked me the question, so I can say what I think. Other people might have different opinions, but based on my experience, young people are going to act the way you expect them to act. And if expectations are low, if they are told certain things, uh, they're going to act a certain way. So I think our society has changed, and young people have mirrored the society. So if you look back 40 years, when I came in, things were different. We don't need to go into how they were different, but I don't think the young people in their core are different today than they were 40 years ago. I think the nature of man resonates as very similar over millennia, well, at least long times. I think it's a matter of nurturing out what you want to see that young person deliver, find the strength in them, provide expectations, set high standards, hold them to it. Don't lower the standards so that everybody can be equal, because unfortunately that lowers it down to the lowest common denominator. And you'll have high performance if you set high standards and you maintain them and you reach your hand out to help those who need to come up, and you ensure that everybody is able to raise up and meet those standards. I think that we've just kind of reflect our society now. So young people, our future's in good hands.
The Northeast Passage is opening. China and Russia seem intent on dominating the Arctic and its resources and its important sea routes. It seems to me that our U.S. has fallen away from our leadership role in the Arctic in the last century. How many icebreakers and units do we now have in the Arctic compared to China and Russia?
Oh boy. Oh my goodness. You guys are demanding with your questions. I could go on for hours on that one. And I just did an interview with Government Matters on this exact question. It depends on what you consider power, right? So yeah, the Coast Guard doesn't have the number of icebreakers we used to have for the Arctic and the Antarctic missions. But we have policy power. We had led the Arctic Council for a few years. That rotates every couple of years. We have a lot of respect in that domain. We have an Arctic Coast Guard Council that the United States set up, and the U.S. Coast Guard is I know it's the best Coast Guard in the world. It truly is. It's better than a lot of navies in the smaller nations. There's a lot of good leadership in the Arctic at the policy level, where America's got that experience. We are building new icebreakers. We have 3 new polar icebreakers to replace the 2 that remain that are coming along in the different stages of building or funding. I just saw a news report today that our commandant of the Coast Guard is asking the administration for more money to buy even more icebreakers. We at first, when I was still in the Coast Guard, had a program request for 6 new icebreakers. Keep in mind also that the United States, where we're located, if you look at Russia, they actually need icebreakers because of where they operate up there with some of their shipping. So, and China, of course, is a whole different story. There's some politics there, of course. They're looking to have the Belt and Road, right? And they're looking to go and tie that world and Silk Belt around the world from the Arctic to the Antarctic. They're down in Antarctica. So it's a great question. And I would advise anyone who's interested to look, sign up for the Wilson Center and follow them, because they've got a lot of great information on the Arctic. Also, the Coast Guard Academy, we've got a Center for Arctic Study and Policy. So the Coast Guard, we're definitely leading in the Arctic domain.
Did you have any run-ins with foreign ships you can talk about?
That's a really good question. When I was on that one ship I was telling you about where the watchstander had said, ma'am, we're glad to have you here. We went down, it was out of Eureka, California, that ship. And we did a patrol down to the Sea of Cortez, which is the Gulf of Mexico, which at the time, and forgive me, I've lost track of the politics now, but the United States had said, we have free navigation all the way into the Sea of Cortez because a 12-mile limit that was internationally recognized. Mexico said, nope, we're drawing a line across the opening to this Sea of Cortez and nobody can come in. It's our internal waters. So we were doing a freedom of navigation exercise on behalf of the United States government. This is back in the 1980s. And we kind of come on up into the Sea of Cortez with Mexico, Mexican territory, Baja Peninsula, and mainland Mexico on the other side. And this Mexican warship that was bigger than us and had weapons, which we didn't have many. We had a 50 caliber machine gun. It started to approach us. And the crazy thing was a De La Lave, I'll never forget it. It was a retired US Navy destroyer that we had sold through foreign military sales to the Mexican Navy. Now it was coming to harass a Coast Guard cutter. It did circles around us. It got really close. We set general quarters and they had their guns pointed at us. We put all of our protective gear on and we just were kind of petrified for a while because we didn't know if these crazy people were going to shoot at us. And so it didn't. They were challenging us, and after a while, they figured they'd harassed us enough. They backed off, and we all breathed a heavy sigh of relief.
What's next for you? You've written this book. You've gotten through your first talk. What's next for you?
Well, there's 3 ways that I want to give back my leadership lessons learned having retired. I am not working. Sorry, I hit all my blinds here. I'm not working for pay. I volunteer on 6 or 7 different advisory boards and councils because I want to give back. But there's 3 ways I'm giving back my leadership lessons learned. The first is the book. That's been a career goal that just came true on June 1st. I have a blog called Leading with Character. I publish it every week through Homeland Security Today. And thirdly, I have book talks like this, speeches, podcasts, interviews, and different venues that can get the message out. So it's a matter of getting the message out, leadership lessons learned that can help other people achieve their full potential.
Well, thank you for taking the time for joining us tonight. I greatly appreciate this. Good luck with this book, although I don't think you're going to need luck. It's going to do well. So congratulations on doing this. You're going to do well on all these other talks, a piece of cake. Again, thank you everyone for joining us. Sandy, continued good success with this, and we'll definitely see you around town.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate you hosting me.
All right, not a problem. Thank you, everybody. Good night, everyone. Stay safe.
Good night.